Should I do it? Should I do it? I'm gonna stick the camera in the water, but it'll be from old footage. So just kind of like imagine that whole transition. So before I get started, I want to tell you about my business. I'll keep this super short. My grandfather was a master watercolor artist. He passed away in 2007. I took over his business to make beautiful reproductions of his prints. If you like cool watercolor of California scenes in Europe, check us out, DonO'Neill.com. It supports the channel, supports me. Check it out, DonO'Neill.com. And now let's get started. So in the last video that I made, I watched it and there was a bunch that I wanted to change after the fact, and I'm not going to do that. So I figured I'd kind of add to it. And this video is called Visions from the Past. And kind of the context is, what does it mean to be in the past, thinking about the future? Because that's what the last video is all about doing. And I want to tell a couple stories that have been on my mind. The first is Jules Verne. Now, I've never actually read Jules Verne, but I'm familiar with his work. And in the 1860s, he produced a book called From Earth to the Moon, I believe. And it was science fiction, you know, of the 1860s, and he was talking about humans seriously going to the moon. And which was like, you know, he didn't have a magic spell or he didn't have a wizard. It was like using plausible physics that they knew at the time. And he got some really important things right. And one was that humans would go to the moon someday, and the other was they would leave out of Florida. In the book, he actually depicts them leaving out of Florida. Now, the technology that he was familiar with was wrong. He figured they would use artillery cannons to launch people to the moon, which they didn't. They used rockets. But you can't really fault him for that. He was on the right track. He just, you know, and his vision was right, just different means. And the other thing was, he kind of, and you can see this in the drawings, the illustrations of the book, which I have seen, he depicted people from the 1860s wearing 1860s style clothing going to the moon. He didn't get the culture right. He didn't quite see that culture would change so much different over the 100 years that he wouldn't recognize it. And you really cannot expect that. You can't, you know, the visionaries, they can see a technology changing something, but they couldn't tell you how it's going to change music or hairstyles or fashion or language. And that's usually what science fiction will get wrong, is the cultural change. And he's still, you know, a brilliant visionary. And I want to now kind of move up to a vision of the 1930s. In the 1930s, there was a very important invention. There was many important inventions, but this one would go on to change culture, but it didn't set out to change culture. And this one is the electric guitar. I believe it was invented in 1934 and became a commercial product in 1936. My numbers are off. I'm taking a walk in the middle of nowhere or some neighborhood. I don't have them right in front of me. You can look them up. Let's call it the 1930s. Now, the electric guitar was invented as a means of making a guitar sound louder so it could keep up with the orchestra, because, you know, guitars can only put out so much sound, and orchestra, all the horns and saxophones, those are pretty loud. The guitar's pretty quiet in contrast. And that's what it was set out to do. The people who invented that instrument invented it for a culture that they were familiar with. They invented it for their culture. They invented it for their music. They didn't invent the electric guitar because they wanted to listen to rock music. That's not how it worked. They didn't have the idea of rock music and then say, wow, you know, this would sound really cool. We need to invent the instrument to get there. That's not how it happened. How it happened is they invented the instrument, and then fast forward a couple more decades, and you had Chuck Berry inventing rock music. He used a technology that has been around for a long time. String instruments have been around for, well, like 1100 years in Europe, something like that, since like 900 AD, I think. I don't know, or 1100 AD. I know they've been around for a very long period of time. It wouldn't surprise me if the Romans had such a thing, but I don't know. People understood string music. People understood big bands. They understood orchestras. Humans have had that kind of stuff for a very long time. But rock music, while it evolved out of jazz and blues, was new, and it made use of a technology that was brand new. And that technology was not invented to make rock music, but rock music is what came from it. And from what I understand, the early electric guitar inventors didn't like rock music. I think it was Les Paul did not like rock music. It's kind of strange. He invented the tool for rock music. But where's all this going? Well, one, people will see technology and they won't quite grasp the cultural change from the technology. They'll grasp, like the big stuff, or they'll be visionaries. One piece of art that I really like is retro futurism, where you'll see it like art from the 60s, what the year 2000 will be like. And really, it's basically people in the 60s, just with some gadgets, and it looks like the 60s. Some of my favorite pieces are from the year 1900. There were these artists who created what they thought the world of 2000 would look like. And what didn't change was the people. The people in the drawings looked like people from the year 1900. Their fashion, their posture, their everything about them looked 100 years old, but they would have some gimmicky flying thing, or they would have a huge building on wheels. And they were thinking, and they were really thinking, but they didn't understand the cultural impact so much. The last video I talked about driverless cars, and that's my vision from the past, because while today's the future, today's also the past. And the vision of the past was that these self-driving cars that I felt that they were going to change how people saw transportation. Now, many people look at them and they think, well, they're going to look at them with their existing mindset and say, well, how do I use a car? I buy it and I keep it in my garage and I drive it places. So they're thinking, okay, I'll just copy and paste that to self-driving cars. It's really no different. And my big assessment was really not how the technology would work, but how culture would respond and how culture would change. Because the car changed our culture. Prior to the widespread adoption of vehicles, especially among middle-class people, the car-centric suburbs didn't exist. And there was a couple, but it wasn't till really after the Second World War till they were built. The fact that not just the car was invented, but everyone had one, or could have one, or at least every person of middle-class income could have one, drastically changed culture. It changed music, it changed a lifestyle, it changed so much about culture that didn't exist a generation prior to that, and I firmly believe will not exist a generation from now. So it's very weird, because we're going to be in a comparable culture shift. Now, I'm not claiming I know what the culture is going to look like of the future. In fact, I'm probably wrong. But what I am claiming is that such a change in society, such a change with technology, has to result in a huge just change in culture. It would be impossible for that not to happen, because every time we've seen that, it's happened. Every time we've seen a technology change, come around, it's resulted in a change of culture. Look at internet culture. If you talk to a lot of computer scientists, say from 40 years ago, they would probably think that the internet's going to be a big thing, but they probably wouldn't tell you, they couldn't probably accurately describe the culture from it that would exist today. If you went back to 1991 and you asked, the top computer people, said, hey, there's this thing called the internet, it's kind of becoming something. What do you think the culture in 30 years is going to change from it? Unless they said you can get lots and lots of pornography from it, most of their assessments are probably going to be wrong. So this whole idea of futurism, the thing that I think causes people the most issues isn't imagining technology, because we can see science fiction and we can actually just kind of see things get better. I mean, you're going to have to assume that your phone you currently have is going to get better. Like, you're not going to have the same smartphone today as you're going to have 10 years from now. And the smartphone from 10 years from now is going to be way better than anything on the market today. It'll be a night and day difference. But this whole cultural shift, we're already kind of seeing it happen. And one example is the dead malls. I love dead mall videos because they're a relic of the past. And, people say, oh, I'm so sad that the mall shut down. The reality is, it's sad to see that part of the past go. But for most people, as soon as they didn't have to go to the mall anymore, they stopped going. I know I did. I know once I could get the things I wanted without having to go to the shopping mall, I stopped going to the shopping mall. The big box stores, supermarket, and Amazon and small businesses, but the big giant Galleria malls, they fell out of fashion, and really for good reason. Much of that, I just saw an Amazon van go by, so that's why I want to bring this up. But look at how much of your purchases you can now do on Amazon, or ordering by a company like mine, DonO'Neill.com. Got to throw those plugs in there. It's what pays for all this, Amazon has changed retail culture. People claimed Walmart was going to be the big one because they'd be in every community. And here Walmart never really became an e-commerce giant like Amazon has done. That's all Amazon. In the last video, I made a cultural projection. It's actually one I still stick by, and that is, if people don't own cars because they have other means of getting around to replace the cars, which I said mass transit cannot do. To reiterate, I'm a firm believer if mass transit could do 80% of everything you could ever need, we might only reduce car ownership 20% or 30% in the United States. The reality is it has to do 100%, not 80%. And the self-driving car will do 100% of what you need. But if we had a city, if you built a city around people who did not all have cars, it's going to be very different than the cities that we have. It's going to be very different. And I'm not... And the whole thing was a call out to challenge to designers saying, well, how would you design a city that has these self-driving cars and has boring tunnels? How would you design it where people, maybe 15% of the population owned a car and versus, 90%? I think you would design the city very differently. I think you would have very different priorities. You wouldn't need car storage, and parking would no longer be a limiting factor. But as far as what the actual architecture and design looks like, I think it'll be one of those things where there'll be some genius designer, some Chuck Berry, who goes and reinvents great architecture and urban design. Actually, probably many people, because rock music was invented by many people as well. But it's kind of I think we need to look at the self-driving car is kind of like the electric guitar. They kind of rhyme too. Wow, I thought I screwed that up in my head with that line. I probably did, but it's a cultural shift every bit as much as it is an economic and a technology shift. And cultural shifts, despite what people say, can happen very quickly. 2 videos ago, I show a new library that just opened up here in Riverside, and it had a time capsule to open in 50 years. And I said, I'm happy to see the time capsule reopen. I'll be 87 years old. But something I really thought about was that library, of all the patrons that it'll ever have, they all have one thing in common, and that is they haven't been born yet. That library was opened in 2021. And I could tell by looking at it, it's going to be open for a very long time. We're talking hundreds of years. So the majority of people who will make use of that library will be people who are not currently with us yet. They have yet to be born. And I imagine 50 years in the future, when they reopen that time capsule, very few of us will be, in the crowd will be people who remember that time capsule going in. I hope I'm there. That's my goal. I'll be there that day. July 1st, 2071, I think it said on there. Yeah, 2071. That's a long time. But trying to think of all the ways that life is going to change in the meantime, because I imagine that it's going to look the surrounding area of that library is going to look very different. And I imagine the people who were all there on that time capsule opening day, in addition to haven't been born yet, will be culturally very different than we are today. I mean, do you think they'll be listening to Beatles music in the 2070s? You know, those songs will all be 100 years old. You know, that may be something they associate with old people. I mean, think about it. Do you listen to music from the 20s today or the teens today? I don't. But maybe they will. You know, that's a cultural change. Maybe music will change so much. But I think, you know, in order for music to change, there needs to be a new instrument of music. There needs to be a new something to make it actually new. So this idea of visions from the past, it's the friction I see about a lot of this technology, whether self-driving cars or renewable power, is friction from an old mindset. You're saying, hey, what we've got works so good, well, I'll just do it like that. And you know, when early car pioneers were making commercial automobiles, there was no hybrid era. There was no era where they were making a car that could be pulled by a horse or driven by petroleum. That didn't exist. They didn't prioritize such a thing. And horses, people knew for thousands of years, and then they didn't try to get both. And that's kind of why, like, a hybrid car, the original hybrid car didn't exist. It was no horse petroleum hybrid. It was horses, no horses. And that's actually kind of why I think that the era of the personally owned driverless car will be brief. I mean, I think it'll always be around, but I don't think it's going to be as popular as people think. I actually think very few people own them. I mean, Tesla owners will. There will be people who do own them. But for the most part, I think people just order rides and a service that they like. So that's kind of all for this video. This may not be the only August video because it's kind of a follow-up of the July video. And the challenge is going to be, when you're envisioning a future, are you envisioning your culture using that future technology? Or are you envisioning, you know, people who haven't been born yet using that future technology? Because what could be very foreign to you could be second nature to those people who have yet to be born or who are little kids. Like I've been saying, you know, for people born in the year 2010, likely by the time, well before they turn 16 in big cities, they're not going to get around in a petroleum-powered, human-driven car. They're going to adopt that before they turn 16. And that is going to, you know, they're going to be the early adopters, I believe. But that's kind of going to cause a big ripple effect. Their culture is going to be different than their parents and grandparents. So like that library, you know, you're designing something for the future. And like Jules Verne, you're thinking about something of the future. But the people who may be using it are different than you. And it's a really weird thing to think about. So anyway, hope you like that one. A little quick walk around the canal. It's a nice, wonderful, hot day here in Riverside. As I mentioned, if you're in the art buying market and you're looking for cool watercolors, check us out, DonO'Neill.com, Don O'Neill Watercolor. Follow me on Instagram at Riley O'Neill, and I'll see you for the next one.